Hi, my name is Irina and I am, I think, 31 years old. Let's say 31. And I'm an artist, and my link with mental health is that I think since I was, I suppose, 15, 16 years old, I've been struggling with different manifestations of mental illness, whether it's depression or like deep anxiety, and to the point of not functioning. And it is ongoing, so that is my link with mental health issues. So whenever I have to talk to new doctors, this is how I give my spiel, so this is what I'll do now. I guess because I grew up in a boarding school, so and that was not very easy for me. So my means of coping with that is to obsessively just hide under academics, like study, or like overperform, and so that I didn't have to think about the difficulties of adapting to this very so that I didn't have to address how difficult it was adapting to the hostel life. So when I was 15 or 16 years old, and this was nearing the SLC, which is like one of the big exams, supposedly, of Nepal, so I really took that very seriously. But then at the same time, I had this. But at the same time, my father got sick around that time. So that pattern of obsessing over my studies was interrupted by this family emergency. And I think that's when that delicate shell that I had crafted, like, kind of cracked open, and all the problems started emerging, because I could no longer hold on to studying, because I had this very intense family situation that I had to be a part of. And then I could literally feel my mind being torn into these two places. And then that just cracked me up, and I couldn't function anymore in that hostel. Like, my mind was constantly in a frenzy. There were times where I couldn't formulate sentences, but at the same time I felt the pressure to study for my exams, but my mind was not working. And I was constantly obsessing over my performance in studies, to the point where I totally blocked out what was happening to my father. And it was very difficult for my elder brother, my family, because it was a very new manifestation. Up until then, I think I'd suppressed all the difficulties, and I had reached this point of not functioning, of just having these strong responses where I had to, where it was so scary to be around people, but then it was equally scary and heavy to be with myself. So, and then this was very new to my family also. I was just not functioning basically as a person, and I couldn't think properly. It was like my mind was stuck in a loop, but in a very dangerous loop that kept reminding me that I couldn't think, or I couldn't formulate the ideas that I'm studying. I mean, physically it was a very harrowing experience, but slowly, then I went to a doctor also. I remember being prescribed medicines, but I think ultimately it was just like extracting myself from the hostel and then having my whole family be with me, and then slowly, as time passed, because I spent more time with my family, the atmosphere softened a little bit, and I felt like, okay, I've come out of it. And then I went to Norway to study as a UWC student, a United World College student. And life was amazing there because I think that was my safe space. It was free. I met people from all around the world. There weren't any like these invisible patriarchal or toxic social structures that was kind of eroding my sense of self. So it was a happy time. And then I went to Canada, and then the first 2 years were amazing there. But you never know when that thing comes back again. And like I had to make decisions about my studies, and at the same time my father got sick again. So again I cracked open and I couldn't function there. And this was in a foreign country, and I loved being by myself, but now I was in a foreign country by myself and barely functioning, basically. It was very difficult. I don't know how to explain it apart from like the physical sensations that I remember, which is like my mind, my brain constantly feeling like it's burning all the time. And again, the pressure of having to finish assignments, that phobia that I had before came back again, and I couldn't. Even though I did okay, the process of trying to finish my work was like mentally it was very, very agonizing, and I couldn't formulate sentences. And then that started affecting my friendships because I was always this happy, cheery person, and then suddenly I'm like this person who's not functioning but has to mask, has to get around because this is a foreign country. So I had to come back, basically. I couldn't, because my family was worried, and then so I couldn't finish my degree there properly as a normal undergraduate student would. I had to come back here and finish it via distance education. And then it was around that time that I lost my father also. So I think all these events kind of, they just took me away from this imagined life that I had after being better, in Norway and then going to Canada. Like it just broke that trajectory. And I've been here ever since, and I can't explain why. I mean, of course, there have been very good things here. The atmosphere, in a way, is more conducive to my elastic time, like where I need a lot of time to decompress, but at the same time I can feel that those episodes are still at the background and they're not letting me do certain things like travel the world again and study different things, meet different people.
I'm still now like you're
it's never ending. No, it comes and goes, it comes in different ways and in different manifestations. So I think as time passes, I've just learned through different kinds of support systems, I've learned that this is a part of me now, and it will come whenever things are not right, or it might come whenever it wants to come.
That's why you don't dare to travel, because it could happen when you travel.
That's the thing. It's like I don't think that is what's stopping me. It's like I don't mind being alone and distraught and not functioning. There's something invisible that is not like letting me take that step again. But I don't know, it might be that, but it might not also, because that is not the first fear that comes into my head. I think what stops me is my inability to apply to go abroad, and then that inertia brings me down even more. So it's very unclear. But what has happened in the last year is that I found a new therapist, and after talking with her, this possibility of me being neurodivergent has come up, and we even did the test, and then turns out I'm autistic. I'm in the spectrum. And neurodivergence is, so in simplest way, I guess you could, when you look at the world, there are people who you could call neurotypical are the people who, despite the demands of life, despite the way life has structured itself and has overtaken people, those people can manage, they can get by, they can function in a way, you know, because they can adapt. But the neurodivergent people it's very difficult for them to adapt to the way things are, and that sense of difficulty manifests in different ways. Basically, their mind functions differently, but then the world is still the same. So that
it's an umbrella term for a lot of
things. It's an umbrella term for people whose mind and being
it's difficult to function
in a society as it is, because their mind functions differently. And so maybe the reason I'm not applying is because one of the things that is very common in autistic people is it's very difficult for them to change their environment of their own will. Like, it's not as easy as, oh, that program sounds interesting, let me apply. Like, there's a lot of thing going underneath that keeps us where we are until some force, you know. That's one of the things. Yeah, that is what people say, and that has come up in discussions a lot. And what I think now that I'm thinking about it more is, yes, different people have different points of intersection in terms of how we respond to the world. But when you're in the spectrum, those responses are often like magnified to the point of dysfunction. Like, let's say you also feel that it's difficult to move to a different country, and I also feel the same way. But what could happen is that, like, you could say, oh, well, maybe I'll slowly try to apply, and then maybe in a year or so you go, and then you manage, you know, but there was that difficulty for sure, like you felt it, but then you slowly overcame it. For me, maybe what would happen is like, oh, I want to apply, but I can't. But then that is the thing that gets me down for a year. I can be depressed for a year over that. No, but this is a difficult area, because when I try to, there's the stigma, no? When I say, oh, I'm autistic, this is what I often, and when I share the symptoms, even I feel a bit weird because, oh, doesn't everyone go through this? But it's like when you actually live through it, you can see the difference between people who experience it and move on versus people who are demolished by the experience. So, yeah, I think it was a learning experience for them as well. And I'm very lucky in the sense that my family, they're very sensitive and supportive, and I'm the youngest in the family, so there was always this special, I don't know, protectiveness and openness to whatever I was going through. But looking back, it was a learning experience for them. They had to try different things out. They had to see what would work, what would not work. And in that time, they had their own emotional reactions to the difficulty that I was facing, that they saw. And sometimes those emotional reactions were like made my situation worse. And it was a vicious cycle at times, you know. But at the same time, there have been moments where, because they're trying to learn constantly, you know, they try to look at my situation in a through a softer but more supportive lens, through lessons that are a bit, through practical ways that have come out of research and out of experiences, you know. So like, some family member might be so emotionally overwhelmed by, you know, my situation that their response is to like just be equally sad and like lie down next to me when I can't get out of bed, but then that doesn't help me, right? But at the same time, when they learn that, okay, it took a long time for them to accept that sleeping through 2-3 days is an okay response. And it took a long time for me to accept that as well. It was only through this new therapist that I had this new lens of understanding that sleeping for days on end is my way of coping or my way of protecting and healing myself. But then when you look at it from the societal standard, it's like, oh my God, like you're wasting your life, you're wasting your time. But then that's the only way you can come out of it. Yeah, because when I came here, I had to find a therapist. I had to find some sort of treatment because I was not functioning at all.
After school or after Canada?
After Canada. During my school years also we consulted a psychiatrist and I was given medications then, but it kind of tapered off. But after Canada I had to find some kind of mental health support, and then it began with this therapist who was a specialist in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it worked up until a certain point, but then after that point it became a bit rigid for me because there were a lot of worksheets in cognitive behavioral therapy, and it works, but sometimes there might be situations where it might not work for you as a person. And then I had to find another therapist. So there were like we had to keep looking till chance encounters with people and their connections led me to the therapist that I have now, and who I'm really happy with. And the same thing with the psychiatrist too. The psychiatrists here were very supportive, but I don't know, I think there was this frustration in our family that I was just not getting better, which is also this thing that we need to talk about. Like, there is no getting better, it's just like this up and down, and you see how you can embrace that. But through that I found another psychiatrist, and then the medication changed, and I think that played a very huge role in making my life slightly lighter and slightly more approachable. But then through that experience I did encounter mental health professionals where it was difficult to separate the stigma that they held inside themselves and their profession. So even like small things, like if you say, yeah, sometimes I smoke marijuana, for them, sometimes their emotional reactivity to such things overtakes their profession to the point where that's the only thing they fixate. They're like, oh no, but then that's not good. Like, why don't you drink alcohol instead? And then like for me, like my father was an alcoholic. So it's like, you can never, that distinction between what the societal beliefs that they held kind of overtook the neutrality that you expect out of a medical professional. But that was just a small example. But and also, there's this structure in Nepali society where if you're a kid, and the therapist and the parents can easily become a team. And that can be very toxic for the kid, because if the parent and the therapist are a team in a sense that they discuss the kid, and then sometimes the parent can tell, oh, your therapist told me that you need to be stronger. If the kid hears that union between the adults can be very toxic to the kid. So there's it breaks the trust. And I think that has a lot to do with the societal structure here, where it's like, oh, adults are all together and then the kid is a kid, and there is no boundary, between the safety of the kid, emotional safety of the kid, and this kind of camaraderie that the adults have, even if it is between a mental health professional and the parent. So that has affected me many times, like where that trust has been broken, because for those mental health professionals, like just having these casual health conversations because it is kind of a judgment, right? When you tell the parent of the kid that you're treating that the kid needs to be stronger now, it is a judgment, and that can easily seep into my relationship with my parent in the way they perceive me. So these like invisible societal standards and structures where certain group of people are a team, and it's okay to render the kid as this person that they need to fix, and like they'll do whatever they need to do, but not treat the person as like a full-grown individual, you know. And so from my personal experience, especially with quote unquote depression and like, you know, years and months of not functioning, from my experience in terms of what the family could do is it is a very stressful situation, yes, but I think it will be easier on the person suffering if the family members around them don't panic so much, treat it as a part of their life, and it's not something that can be fixed. The more the person suffering hears that oh, we need to fix you, we need to, like, if we do this kind of treatment, then you'll be fixed. If you do exercise, then you'll be fixed. That kind of dialogue can be very toxic to the person who is recovering or is going through that. So if the family kind of accepts this as a part of life rather than something that needs to be fixed, I think that can be helpful, which leads me to this other
no, it's the window.
Oh, okay. Which leads me to this other insight, is that often people who are suffering from mental illness are cornered off as people who need to be fixed, but the reality is that there's something wrong with the world outside, and it's not us that need to be fixed, but it's the world outside that needs to change in order for people from all walks of life to function better. So rather than cornering the people suffering from mental illness as, oh, now you can't handle life, you're weak, we need to fix you, I think we need to turn the lens to what's wrong out there that's causing us to have these reactions. And in terms of the medical system here, based on personal experience, I've found that there is a stigma when it comes to women and having a history of mental illness. And when that package goes into a hospital with some like emergency, which is linked to, let's say, physical aches or physical pains, oftentimes, because of this big history that we have of mental illness, and because we're women, oftentimes that physical ailment is not addressed directly, because it is almost directed to the mental illness or to the fact that we're women, and then we get like emotionally overwhelmed often. So I have had this experience where I went to the hospital with like this very painful heel pain, and then I started having like these spells of dizziness, but because my book, that medical book, had this long history of mental illness, even though the doctor was trying to be supportive, I think unknowingly the doctor was pushing most of the symptoms and directing it to the mental illness that I had. And I felt very insulted because it was a physical thing that I was going through, but I wonder if that person would have dealt with me differently if I didn't have that history. I wonder if he would have given me more direct treatments and more direct exercises, which when I did get a certain direct exercise, it helped, you know, like that dizziness left. But I went to the emergency room at one point of time, and then because I had a history of mental illness, they didn't even like check me thoroughly because they couldn't do anything. Instead, they gave me a sedative. So it's like there's this thin balance between being sensitive towards mentally ill patients, but also respecting what they're saying, you know, respecting their aches and their symptoms, and then try to be as methodical also when those situations come, rather than letting your biases inform you. So there's that. And I think neurodivergence needs to really come into the picture, because often in my like history, every time I went to a doctor, it was always, oh, she has depression. But But then now when like this new idea of, oh, you're neurodivergent has come up, so many things have started making sense in my life. So many responses that I had towards life's difficulties seem very valid now. And depression is a part, but it's a part of this larger disconnect between how I function and how the world functions. So, but then that was not in the discussion for a long time. And women apparently have, because women are able to mask themselves in social situations so well, autism in women goes by unnoticed. And I think like I'm a living case of like, even I didn't know that I'm in the spectrum because I adapted to my social demands. But if that comes into the picture, I think life of many of us neurodivergent people and of neurotypical people who suffer from similar, symptoms can be easier, I think. I think that's where things can go in terms of mental health, I mean, media, social awareness is helpful, but you also need to be sensitive about how we're packaging that information. Because now like media has this potential of incorporating things that we haven't discussed about, whether it's autism in women or whether it's the medical system and the biases that the medical system has towards people with mental illnesses, or the bias or the insecurities that we have with medication. Like if the media or any social awareness campaigns begin working with the nuances of mental illness as opposed to like this bigger, like simplistic view of mental health, maybe that might help. But I'm a bit skeptical, or like I'm a bit skeptical about how it might be packaged and like distributed.
It can do more damage than
So I don't know. So I think one advice is, it might be very exhausting, but I think it is important to keep seeking support with the hope that you'll find the right kind of support at some point of time. There might be moments where you go to a therapist and you might have a very disappointing experience with that therapist or mental health professional. But the good thing is, right now in Kathmandu, there are many different pockets of mental health professionals and collectives, and it's much more diverse now. So if you keep looking, rather than quitting, saying, oh, like this is something that no one else can understand, it is very helpful to find support. So basically I'm saying if you go to a therapist and the therapist doesn't work out for you, that's okay, that's very natural, and it's very natural to keep looking for new therapists till you find the right combination. And medication is okay. You need to keep trying them out till you find the right combination as well, depending on your situation. I had a lot of fear towards medication, but and that fear is valid. But if you go through this route of really researching, getting as much information as you can, and know that you can always opt out of medication when it doesn't feel right, it is okay to go for it, to try, because sometimes it's a combination of things that work for you and not just, one thing or the other. And main thing is, I think we need to start looking at what needs to change out there and we need to start looking at more towards what needs to change out there in the society and be a bit more kinder to ourselves, because whatever we're responding is towards what's out there. So I think if we start thinking about what we need to change out there rather than saying, oh, I need to fix myself, how I'm responding is not right, then like maybe a new window will open, because then it's not our fault. We're not the ones who need to be fixed. I had this conversation with a junior student, a former junior student from the school that I used to study, the boarding school that I used to study here. And now, like with social media, things have become very exciting, but also very complicated and toxic for teenagers. and that has manifested in a very dangerous way, especially in boarding schools, based on the conversations that I've heard. And so what I'm trying to say is, especially in boarding schools, if you do have mental health professionals, you really need to first start from scratch and think about what patriarchal structures are making things difficult for especially the girls who are struggling with online harassment or bullying. Until and unless those patriarchal hierarchies are addressed, no matter how many mental health professionals you bring into the program, the person or the girl or the individual who's suffering from those problems will always have the shorter end of the stick. So especially for boarding schools and high schools, like rather than doing like this top-down approach of, oh yes, we have a mental health professional and that's why we're so amazing, you need to really look inwards and see what structures that have existed is harming the person who's suffering. Because there have been instances where the medical health professional already has this bias towards the girl or the person who's struggling from online harassment. And the medical health professional, along with the teachers who are in power, have this tendency of saying, oh, boys will be boys, let this go. If you complain now, their life is going to be ruined. So please be kinder, let them go. So if you have this kind of power structures that are pushing girls and individuals, people in, who are not like who identify themselves as other than like boys, or like if there's this power structure that is pushing them to like be silent, like it's not going to work. So we really need to think about what structures need to be changed. Okay, in terms of mental health and gender, I think, is the sound okay? Hello, hi, hello. Yeah. In terms of mental health and gender, I think it is, should I keep going? Okay. In terms of mental health and gender, I think I found from personal experience that it is very difficult for men to accept that they are struggling mentally, especially when it's not out and out, something that's very visible and obvious. But if it's something, if they are, feeling a bit vulnerable mentally, it's very rare that they even accept and acknowledge the possibility that they might need a therapist, that seeking support is okay. I think it comes after, that decision comes after many years of thinking through, what you've been through. So like, that's what I've noticed, that it's difficult for men to really embrace and accept that they are struggling mentally and they need to seek support. But I think that in that sense, I think really it's okay to seek support, and even if you're a man, and it's okay to find therapists that are not so good and then keep looking for therapists till you find the good ones. But this comes from like personal experience, especially with friends and my family members. But when they have tried it, it's like, even if you have a bad therapist, I feel there's always something that you can take away. Of course, sometimes it can be emotionally very draining, but through the different therapists that I've been to, there's always this little bit of advice that you can't see because you're in a very vulnerable space. That can always come, and you can always take that with you, and then choose what didn't work for you. So even for that experimentation, just seeking out therapists and mental health professionals is okay. And that's why it's difficult for men, because they're conditioned to be like, oh, strong, must handle everything by myself. Even if they're the most sensitive people. So we need to maybe start breaking that a little. Like, we're all in the same racket with different complications. So.